Okay, I think we're about ready to go. Thanks to everyone for coming. This is Authors at Alden. My name's Jeff Callett. I'm the sales manager at Ohio University Press. And I just wanted to make a couple of introductory notes before I turn it over to Evan and our two photographers. First of all, this is, I think, our 8th different Authors at Alden engagement. We started this back in 2011, and it was with an Ohio University Press author. I think the library has a mix of different presenters and speakers, but we've been fortunate enough to have 8 of them over the years, and it's a great opportunity for our authors to mix with the local Athens crowd and community. And I just want to say thanks to Barb Fiocchi in the back for coordinating this and helping us to get our authors in town. Also, I wanted to mention the next Authors at Alden event is taking place on Tuesday, July 11th. It sounds like a pretty fun activity. It's called Living Letters, a special delivery from Ohio's frontiers and front lines. And it sounds like an old school letter writing event. From the material that I had, it says, experience the danger, drama, and romance of historical correspondence in this interactive event and write your own Civil War style letter using period stationery, fountain pens, and sealing wax. So that's coming up in July. Okay, I'm going to introduce the fellows behind me right now. First, Evan Shaw. He is this gentleman right here. He's going to be asking questions of the photographers. Evan is a documentary filmmaker at WOUB and the Barbara Gerald's Institute for Storytelling and Social Impact. His work includes films on a wide variety of topics, including social, cultural, and historic documentaries. He also oversees the production of the Our Town documentary series, which examines the histories of local towns and cities within southeastern Ohio. He's done so far Jackson, Nelsonville, Pomeroy, and Lancaster. And if I can say,
yeah, absolutely.
Athens is the next city in the project, and I think next early 2018?
Next March, yeah, there'll be a premiere at Memorial Auditorium most likely next March. And it'll be a documentary about the history of Athens.
So that project is one of the things that made me think Evan would be a great guy to have asking questions about our two landscape photographers. So I'm going to turn this over now to Ian. And Ian Adams, right over here on the left, is an environmental photographer, writer, and educator, specializing in Ohio's natural, rural, historical, and garden areas. 22 books of his color photography have been published, including 4 projects with Ohio University Press. One about the Ohio Governor's Residence in Bexley, Ohio, 2 photographers' guides to Ohio, and then the one that we're here for today, Ohio in Photographs. Since 1989, Ian has produced more than 60 Ohio calendars and conducted more than 200 seminars and workshops in nature, garden, and digital photography throughout North America. He's an adjunct professor at Ohio State University's Agricultural Technical Institute up in Worcester, where he teaches digital photography and has carried out garden photography assignments for country gardens, fine gardening, horticulture, living the country life, and organic gardening magazines, as well as numerous landscape design firms and other organizations. Ian lives in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. And a little note here about travel. During the past 3 decades, Ian has traveled about 1.2 million miles around the Buckeye State in his photography explorations. I've heard Ian say that before, and I had to repeat it. It's pretty impressive. Now, Randall Lee Schieber, right here in the center. Randall is a commercial photographer based in Columbus, Ohio. He has also been photographing professionally for over 30 years. He specializes in editorial, architectural, location, and travel photography. His landscape, scenic, and nature photography can be found in numerous publications such as Midwest Living, Ohio Magazine, in materials put out by the State of Ohio Travel and Tourism Board, Experience Columbus, and with commercial clients ranging from the likes of McDonald's, Sears, Cleveland Medical Organizations, and Kokosing Construction. Randall was born in Findlay, Ohio. Early childhood was spent in Mexico City. He studied photography and art first in Tucson, Arizona, and later at Ohio State University. He earned a BA degree from Kent State. Randall's work has also appeared in a number of calendars and in several books besides Ohio in Photographs. One book project that Randall's worked on is called Ohio Then and Now, and for that, he logged over 40,000 miles in just 1 year, recapturing historic views. So I kind of imagine Randall and Ian sort of crisscrossing over the years. 3 decades, they must have seen each other several times on the road, I would imagine. Anyways, before I turn it over to Evan to start the questions, I just wanted to say we've got books for sale over here, and I'm sure afterwards Ian and Randall will sign. We also have Ohio University Press, our newest seasonal catalog, so you're welcome to pick one of those up for free. And thanks again for being here.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jeff. Thank you, everyone, for coming out this afternoon. We're so glad to see you. Thank you, Ian and Randall, for joining us here in Athens, making the trip down. Let's start out with a little bit of background. Let's start out with some of your early photography. What inspired you? We'll start with you, Ian, and then work to you, Randall. What inspired you to get into photography, and what's your career been like over the last couple decades?
Well, I've always been interested in the great outdoors. And when I came over from England, which is where the strange accent comes from.
You aren't from around here.
No, I've been here 42 years. I started working in management consulting and worked for an Ernst & Ernst, a big 8 accounting firm in Cleveland for a few years. Had a couple of good years, got some nice bonus checks, and decided to go out and buy a bunch of camera equipment, large format, plate cameras, etc. And started photographing Ohio. And decided to do it full-time in 1990, which was when my job at Firestone Tire, I worked in information systems, departed for downtown Chicago. So I had a choice. I could stay here or I could move to downtown Chicago. I stayed in Ohio, and it took me about 4 years to figure out how to make a living as a landscape photographer. And this will be my 27th year as a freelancer, and I'm very blessed to be able to do what I do.
Fantastic. And Randall, how about you? How did you get started in photography?
I got started when I lived out in Tucson, Arizona,
Okay.
For about 1.5 years, and some very inspiring landscapes out there, and so that kind of inspired me and got me started. Originally, my original interest in photography. I did a lot of nature photography, scenic photography, and then when I came back to Columbus, I decided that's kind of what I wanted to pursue. So, like Ian, it takes several years for you to kind of establish and figure out what you want to do, what direction you want to go. I knew I was interested in landscape photography, but you know, that's one of the tougher areas of photography to make a living at. So, so that's kind of where I initially was interested in, and then it just slowly evolved to doing more than just landscape photography. I started doing more people and events, editorial. I started doing stuff for Midwest Living, Ohio Magazine. And initially, what really was my big break, and a lot of times people will say there's one point, you know, in their life where something happened where they were able to then pursue that dream that they have. And for me, it was producing a calendar on Columbus way back in 1992 called Columbus on the Rise. But it was unique. I used 4x5 equipment. It was unique in the kind of photography that I was doing. And Columbus, you know, has had periods of growth, certainly now in more recent years, but back in the early 90s, a lot of big cities were growing too, and Columbus, you know, their skyline changed dramatically. And that's where I focused on for particular architectural clients and so forth. We put together this calendar. It was a huge success. We sold at least 10,000 copies. And once that was out there, people started coming to me to do photography. So that's one, I guess, event that I would say was critical.
That's
in
what
my-
tipped it off and
That's
started
what tipped it
photography.
off, yeah. for me.
Perfect. What is it, and we'll bounce back and forth, but what is it about landscape photography, we'll start with you, Ian, that inspires you? Why have you devoted almost 3 decades to capturing these landscapes?
I started off trying to do a little bit of wildlife photography, but some of the things that wildlife photographers seem to get up to from an ethical point of view in order to get close enough to their subjects didn't appeal to me. And so I just enjoyed traveling around Ohio. When I started getting into it and realized what a multi-level state it is, everything's on a subtle scale in Ohio. We have nothing like the Rocky Mountains, the California coast, the New England coast, but on a subtle scale, we have an amazing variety of animals, plants, landscapes, historical buildings, the second largest number of historical buildings on the National Register of any state. Third largest after, I think, Massachusetts and New York have a few more than we have. And I just enjoyed it. And my break sort of came when I was invited to go down and talk to Ellen Stein Burbach, who at the time was the editor of Ohio Magazine, which was based in Columbus at the time. And she called me up and invited me to come down with some of my Ohio landscape pictures, all of which were also taken, as Randall said, with a big 4x5-inch plate camera a la Ansel Adams.
Right.
No relative, by the way.
No, oh, I didn't even think.
And I came down and we laid all of these things out on a table in Columbus, down on Capitol Square. And Ellen looked at them, and then she picked out about 15 of them and said, these are 15 cover features for Ohio Magazine over the next 2 to 3 years. Now, what else have you got to back them up?
Wow.
And that resulted in some assignments,
No
some
pressure.
self-assignments, some paid assignments. And I worked as a contributing editor for 12 years for Ohio Magazine before they moved back up to Cleveland. So that sort of got me started. I also hooked up with a company called Brown Trout Publishers, which I think is still the world's largest calendar producing company, based in originally San Francisco, but now LA. And together with another company in Indiana, we're working on about roughly 70 calendars, I think, now. I used to do 2 or 3 a year. Now that I'm getting up in years, one is enough to try to keep going.
Right.
But I still enjoy that. And it's a challenge to keep coming up with new images.
And that's a
But I'll-
year-round job.
Pardon?
It's a year-round job out of
It is
You're
indeed.
having to capture every season for a calendar.
Absolutely. And Ohio is a very seasonal state.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So Randall, what do you love about landscape photography? Why have you devoted so much of your life to it?
Well, I love being outdoors for one thing. I enjoy being out there and hiking. So, you know, that's one thing that kind of draws you immediately. It's challenging. You never know what nature's going to throw at you.
Right.
And like Ian said, even in Ohio, I mean, the weather can change on a dime. I mean, it can be sunny, bright and sunny in one place, and a mile down the road, pouring rain. So it's a challenge to get out there and see what nature brings every day. It changes. You know, you can't go out and do the same image from the same place. It'll always look different, you know, with the weather patterns, with the weather, or with just depending on what season you're photographing in, you know, the blooms don't always come around, you know, the same time of the year. You know, sometimes you have everything kind of bunched together, which is great. You know, when you have kind of either a early warm spring or cold, and so you get blooms sometimes that ordinarily you wouldn't see blooming at the same time. So it's just yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, and it's just you know, I enjoy being outdoors and, you know, being able to do that. I mean, how many people wouldn't like to be outside as their office instead of inside, you know, working away in some cubicle? So, you know, I've been blessed.
So you're outside and you're getting to see amazing scenery, but you're having to work for that. I think a lot of people think photographers go take a little camera and take
Well,
a pic.
and
It's
a lot
physical,
of,
right?
and a lot of times, clients and stuff.
Yeah.
Just like Ian we were talking about that just yesterday about him doing some garden photography down here, and the client wanted to meet ahead of time and set something up, and Ian said, well, let's wait and see let's plan this thing and see, when things are going to be developing and peaking at, a particular moment. And then, you go out and you do the photography. And then, of course, you have to have a plan for the weather. You have to have the right kind of day. You don't want to, for gardens, you don't want a bright, sunny, blue sky day, which a lot of times clients think, oh, it's a great day. It's blue skies, you got to be out there photographing. Well, not for necessarily for landscape, or certainly for garden photography. You just never know.
Perfect. So let's talk a little bit about this book itself. This is one of the only books like this in print right now. There have been some others over the year, but this is by far, obviously, the most up-to-date. And it's also one of the most complete books of Ohio photographs that's out there right now that covers the huge, diverse area of the state. Where did the idea for this book come from? What led to this?
Well, one person that was certainly involved was Governor Kasich.
Right.
Now, I didn't speak to him personally on this, but I have it on good authority from my friends at Ohio University Press that about 2.5 years ago, he happened to be walking around in the museum bookstore in Capitol Square and noticed that there were no books on Ohio, picture books, that a visitor could buy to give to a friend or say, this is what Ohio looks like. Mm-hmm. So I guess he complained to the folks in there, and word got very quickly back to Director Jill Berkowitz, who's sitting here from Ohio University Press. I got a phone call very soon afterwards saying, Ian, how quickly do you think we could put together a new picture book, coffee table book, call it what you will, on the state of Ohio? Well, I gathered about 300 or so images over the next week or two and sent them in, and we realized we had a lot of gaps. Mm-hmm. I don't do much people photography. I don't photograph cultural events and things like Randall does. And so we had gaps both in terms of the type of material and in terms of coverage. And then on top of that, I somehow must have had too much to drink that day. I decided we should challenge ourselves to, for the first time, try to make sure that we had at least one picture from every one of the 88 counties in the state of Ohio. Whenever I do book signings, somebody always comes up and says, are there any books in here from fill in the blank, where they happen to come from? So we decided to do that as well. Well, basically it took us 2.5 years, roughly, about a year, just over a year to finish off the photography. And then it takes almost a year, if not a year, for a press to take a finished manuscript, go through all of the proofing, the editing, the picture selection, the design, backwards and forwards and everything. It's a full year's worth of work to get it actually to the point where it can be published.
And how does that work? Because photography can be a very individual art, where you're out there taking your photograph. How did the two of you collaborate and then work with the press to come up with a finished project? How does that, did you team up? Did you divide and conquer? How did that process work?
Well, I knew Randall and I have been good friends for many years. We've worked together on one or two other traveling art projects and things. And I realized that I was not going to be able to provide a lot of images of Columbus, which I knew Randall had done 4 or 5 books on Columbus, and also had more coverage, say, of Cincinnati than I have, living in the northeast corner of Ohio. And he also, as I said, does a lot of people photography, cultural events. And so Randall agreed to come on board as a fellow photographer, and we sort of went off and did our own things, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, the collaboration was more.
It's a collaboration, but the collaboration really comes at the offices of Ohio University Press when they get hundreds of pictures from me and hundreds of pictures from Randall, and they lay them all out there and try to make sense of them. We did decide that we wanted to organize the pictures in regions: Northwest, Northeast, Southeast, Southwest, and Central Columbus. And that worked for me with a couple of Ohio photography guides a few years ago. We thought it would be a good way to arrange the pictures. And then it was just a case of filling in the gaps, going to those counties that we didn't have any images from, and just piecing it all together. It's just like a jigsaw puzzle. You
Yeah.
start out with a blank slate, and then gradually you put all the pieces in.
Yeah, so there was kind of an existing, just because of the amount of work and the years that Ian and I have been traveling across the state and photographing it, we had a framework of work. And so then I think the collaboration was more of really Ohio University Press seeing the work and then kind of making it gel, putting it together. But Ian and I have always shared ideas, and we are always looking at each other's work and seeing, oh man, that's a place, or that, I haven't seen it taken quite that way, and so forth. So in a sense, there's been sort of a collaboration or a sharing of ideas, over the years. But was there a situation where we sat down and kind of hashed out, okay, no, that was, we provided the images, we shared ideas along the road, but then, of course, University Press, kudos to them, were able to put the work together and make it gel, because that's a really difficult process to put two different photographers and to put the landscape together with the people photography and stuff. And all landscape, if it was just all landscape, it's a little bit easier to do in one sense, but it also wouldn't tell the picture of
Because this is
Ohio.
not just a landscape book. This is a
No,
book
exactly,
of photo
exactly.
Of people and culture and events.
Right.
And
We
so-
want to show the not
Right.
only we want to show the diversity and the the culture events and all that sort of thing, and the it all has to do with kind of the history of Ohio and how it's progressed.
Right.
That has made that the reason for kind of putting together it as more than just a landscape book, but
Perfect.
showing the.
One more question, then we'll start looking at some photographs. Ohio is such a diverse state, and I think people who are not from here don't realize that. They think of Ohio as Cincinnati to Detroit, or maybe I-70 across the middle, and they miss the corners, and they miss all the things we have here elsewhere. How important was it to show that diversity? And was that a challenge to be able to show the different places, or did you enjoy that?
Oh, you're right. Ohio is it's a bit of a misunderstood state in a sense. If you're in a jet at 30,000 feet and you're flying over it, you think, what is there? Just a bunch of checkerboard fields
Right.
in the odd city, railroad lines and stuff like that, but there's no real topography in the sense of the Rocky Mountains or anything like that. But there's tremendous diversity in Ohio, culturally, in terms of the landscape. We have the second largest number of covered bridges of any state
Right.
in the United States. As I say, a lot of historical sites. Courthouses, just about every architectural style you can imagine is well represented somewhere in Ohio. In terms of natural history, wow. We have 120 state nature preserves, 1 million acres of state forests. It's where north meets south, east meets west in terms of animals and plants. And when you start digging into Ohio, you'd need several lifetimes to even try to photograph all of the different kinds of animals and plants that live in the Buckeye State.
Right. Perfect. All right, let's look at some photographs here. We'll kind of bounce back and forth between both of you. We'll start out, I believe the first one. This is one of yours, Randall.
Okay.
Amish girl on bicycle. I love this image. Tell us about this. Where was this taken? How did you stumble upon this?
This is in Holmes County.
Do you want to actually slide over there?
Yeah, I
so
was going
people
to
can see it?
say,
Yeah,
because
slide over
you
next
can't
to me.
really.
Yep. We'll move that out of the way too.
Okay. Slide right
right.
off the
Yeah,
arm
almost
here.
the
That
same
would be a
thing.
good
Go
one.
back about another foot.
There we go.
Is that good?
That's good.
You guys will
How's
see?
that? Can everybody see?
All right. So this is Holmes County.
This is Holmes County,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously one of the largest. I think Pennsylvania has the largest Amish community, but this is probably the second largest.
Ohio.
That was the biggest.
Ohio is the largest
Wow.
in the U.S. I was thinking Pennsylvania, but anyways, it's certainly one of the largest
Right.
or the largest. It's always, as I've traveled around Ohio, obviously it's fascinating when you go up there and you see the lifestyle and everything and the bug,
So were you set up to take this image without her in it? 'Cause it's a perfect image without it.
I kind of initially I go and I drive around and find kind of an area or a vista or view that looks like what I want to do with the right lighting and so forth. And obviously you plan weather-wise for the right conditions and the right time and so forth. But then you drive around a bit, and when you find a location, obviously the first thing that struck me was the repetition of the wheat stacks. So I knew I wanted to capture that, and I took obviously several frames. Then it's a matter of whether you want to have the patience to kind of hang around, and you could be there all day and,
Right.
and nothing would happen. So it's something that, and of course you plan maybe the day that you go, whether it be Sunday because of the different traditions, or Saturday. So there's obviously always a lot of planning, weather-wise, and also when people might be out, and about. With the Amish, with Sunday, they're dressed in their traditional Amish clothes. So so there's planning, and but this image kind of happened just being out there, liking the scene and taking several shots, and really it happened fairly quickly, where this girl on this bicycle. I mean, I saw her coming, and I thought, wow. What a
Right.
what
So
a gift!
It's not luck, but it's putting yourself in a position to take advantage of fortuitous
There's
things.
always some
There's a
luck.
little bit of luck.
There's always some
but
luck,
there's some planning
but
that goes
always
ahead.
there's always a lot of planning that people don't always realize what
Right.
goes in to a lot of photographs.
Perfect.
And as you do it, obviously you learn, and so it's really it's like any field. You have to go out and do it, and get a sense of what's going to make that luck, if you want to call it luck,
Right.
happen.
The harder you work, the luckier you
Yeah,
get.
exactly. You
Absolutely.
make your own
You put
luck.
yourself in that position
Yeah,
to
yeah.
get lucky.
Yeah.
All right. Ian, so this is a cemetery up northeast Ohio, correct? Tell us a little bit about this.
This is
mausoleum.
Lakeview Cemetery, which is one of several wonderful, founded 1860, 1870, thereabouts. Spring Grove in Cincinnati is similar, and other major cities have them. But this is Cleveland's. President Garfield is buried in Lakeview Cemetery. John Rockefeller, who made his fortune in Cleveland, is buried under a 65-foot piece of granite. Wow. Not too far. This one is Mr. Schofield. He fought in the Civil War. He's perhaps best known as an architect, and amongst other things that he designed, the ridges up on the hill here in Athens, the Ohio State Penitentiary in Columbus, the one that was being used for all the movies like the Shawshank Redemption, the Soldier and Sailor's Monument in Public Square in Cleveland. Those are three of the things that he's designed, and this is just my favorite building, edifice, call it what you will, at Lakeview. It's sort of Gothic. It's rather sort of scary looking, like many of his other prisons and buildings like the Ridges, and he deliberately designed them that way. And I just happen to like buildings with lots of detail,
Right.
Particularly when they have sort of a supernatural Gothic look to them. And this was taken with my iPhone.
Wow.
Which I'm now using more and more.
That's, we were talking about that earlier. It's amazing.
We've been talking about that earlier on. It's
And the patina doesn't hurt either.
No.
that's right.
It gives it a lot.
And our resident Schofield historian, Tom O'Grady, from the Southeast Ohio History Center.
Tom's at the back.
Yep, he was telling me the other day that President Garfield, after he was assassinated, this tomb was already completed, but Garfield's tomb wasn't. So President Garfield laid in state in this tomb until they could get his monument completed. So these are all things. I looked through and saw the name Schofield. I knew that name. And so one of the preeminent architects of our state. An absolutely gorgeous mausoleum. All right. Randall, this is Atwood Lake, correct?
This is Atwood Lake, and I think it's one of, other than obviously the Great Lakes, Lake Erie and so forth, but interior lakes, it's one of the prettiest scenic lakes in the state. And I happen to know and have good friends that own a bed and breakfast, Whispering Pines. Don't want to put a plug in there necessarily, but
That's all right.
if you go out that way,
Right.
I'd suggest look them up because it's a great bed
get
and
to see this
breakfast.
every day.
And you got a great scenic view of the lake. So actually that night I stayed with them. I was actually doing some pictures of their bed and breakfast for them. And so I stayed there. And then luckily the next morning, of course, I was right there. So I got up early and It was one of those mornings that you kind of dreamed for, where you had a really thick fog. And so I was out, at the crack of dawn. Of course, you couldn't see much. Sometimes the fog's so thick that there's nothing you can do. And there's where it's a little bit of luck as to how the fog clears and where it clears and so forth. But I had actually picked some spots out the night, the day before, that I might want to shoot in the morning. So there's always that, doing that scouting and initially, and having some areas that you might want to revisit either the next morning or whatever. In this case, I had this area that was one area that I thought I would definitely like to go out in the morning and see what it looked like. So as it turned out, it didn't look at all like this. You couldn't see anything initially. So it was a matter of really kind of hanging out there and seeing how the fog started lifting. And as it lifted, it opened up, and there were, this was one of the best shots where there was still, that nice little bit of fog there in the corner highlighting the clump of trees. Right. And then, of course, the color,
It's
the
gorgeous.
fog, gorgeous. Northeast Ohio, Ian will attest to that, is prime. It's the best fall color in Ohio. I think it rivals New England in some places.
Do you feel a sense of panic during the fall when you only have 2 or 3 weeks to get that
Well,
color?
you feel that panic all the time.
Right.
As a landscape photographer, that's one of the things that that's distressing or that's unfortunate is the fact that in the spring, like I was saying before with the bloom and stuff, and it happens, it's nice if you can get all the blooms kind of happening at once. But same thing, you've got a period of time. Cherry blossoms, they're so fragile, where they're on the trees, and if you get a storm the next day or you get some wind, it'll knock them completely off. Well, it's the same thing with the leaves. So, that's the frustrating thing is that you're lucky if you have a couple days of peak color and a storm doesn't come in and just, wipe out everything before you can do it. So you're very, very limited, not so much in the spring, but certainly
Especially
in the fall.
Because then you go to
especially in the fall.
dead leaves in
yeah, because it can change on a dime as to, so yeah, that's one of the frustrating things
Yeah,
about
absolutely,
landscape photography.
absolutely. This is one of my favorite ones as well. Ian, how did you find the sheep being sheared, this farm? What's the story of this?
As you probably know, Ohio, our largest industry is farming. 1 in 7 working Ohioans works in agriculture and food production. It's by far our largest industry, $120 billion of economic value every year. And nobody's ever done a book on Ohio farming.
Really?
Not a single coffee table book's ever been done celebrating Ohio farming.
Wow.
And as Jill will attest, it's a book we want to put out in
Right.
the next few years, but it's a heck of a lot of work.
Right.
We've got 75,000 farms left in the state of Ohio. And this one is one of the, if not the largest sheep farm east of the Mississippi River. It's in Harrison County. And this gentleman's name is Rick Moore. And Rick is the 7th generation of sheep farmers on this particular farm, which is called Cottage Hill Farm. It's near the little town of Moorfield. So I got to know them quite well over the years. I wanted to start gathering some shots of sheep farming, and asked Rick if I could come down when he was actually shearing the sheep. And he said, sure, be here at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. That's when they start. Well, he sheeps the Australian way. You can see he's actually it's an electrified shear, so it's power driven. And you walk into this barn, and it's quite cool, but the only thing that you can smell is ammonia. And the ammonia is from all of these sheep, each of which weighs over 100 pounds, that are whirling around, and they're very annoyed. They don't know what's going on, and it stinks like crazy, but he doesn't want to open the window to let in a breeze because it might affect the health of the sheep. And then what Rick does, and he does it up to 80 times in a day, is he goes and grabs a sheep, which of course does not want to be sheared.
Of course not.
Has to throw the sheep between his legs and sort of manipulate the sheep in one hand while he's shearing the sheep. Now, he wants to get all of the fleece off in one piece because that's worth more. If it's bloodstained, it's not worth nearly as much. So he doesn't want to cut or nick the sheep at all. But the sheep is twisting and turning, and he's bent over And he does this, as I say, about 80 times a day. Just outside the picture on the right was his son Steve, who was also shearing. I wanted to use natural light. I hate using flash.
You can see the window coming in.
A little bit of light,
Yeah.
and so I cranked the speed setting up to 1600
Right.
On my Nikon, and I just started blasting away. I took 400 photographs in less than an hour, and there were 2 out of 400 where
That's all you
everything
need.
was sharp. I had good posture. I had the sheep looking the way I wanted the sheep to look. And as I say, I think 2 or 3 out of 400 images. But you're concentrating so hard, the time just goes. 1 minute
Right.
you're there, and the next minute, wow, I've taken 400 pictures. Good heavens.
I think we all do that on our own iPhones. We're taking pictures.
Well, that's right. That's
with
right.
thousands of them on there. Yeah.
So it's it's Rick Moore, and he's got 2,000 or 3,000 merino sheep.
Wow.
And it looks almost like West Virginia. It's very, very craggy country around Moorfield, and it's just the kind of, I like environmental portraiture. I'd make a lousy wedding photographer. I wouldn't know where to start. But something like this, a man actually working at his craft on a farm, is just something that I find fascinating. And if we do the Ohio Farming book, then this picture, I'm sure, will be in
I
it.
think that definitely deserves a spot in that. Randall, this is Lake Hope, correct? In
Lake
Fulton
Hope.
County here. Now,
Also-
I got to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Are you in the water in this? Or are you very close to it?
I'm literally almost in the water.
Because
I'm
I
right
noticed
at
it
the
earlier.
water's edge.
Right.
And one of the things that makes, I think, the photograph successful is the perspective and the fact that you're drawn into the image. And that, to me, landscape photography is to draw the viewer into the image. So it's a very wide-angle lens, very, very, like you said, close to the shoreline. And so what happens is it makes, I mean, there was quite a lot of lilies in bloom, and it was quite it covered a good portion of the lake, but not nearly as much as what it looks like it does because of the perspective. So the wide-angle lens tends to, first of all, draw you into the picture, but then it also makes the foreground, it brings that closer up. And so it makes it look like, actually, it looks in the picture almost as if the lilies cover
Right.
at least half or 2/3 of the
Right,
lake,
right.
where really they're only, they're at least 15, 20, 30 feet.
Right.
But so that's one of the, one of the things that as landscape photographers, Ian and I, using perspective and using it to your advantage and drawing and then of course, once again, this is what we talked about, blooms and
Right.
being there at the right
time.
time and so forth. And that's a tough one because every year is going to be different.
Right.
This picture was probably taken around, it was mid-June or so.
Yeah,
but
they
sometime-
should just be coming in about now.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So you should all head out to Lake Hope after
that's
this to go-
actually, that's right.
Time
So
to start
there you
looking.
go.
Right,
That's-
get a
I
wide-angle
would-
lens.
And hopefully you'll be, but who knows?
Right.
It was a warm, fairly warm part of the spring anyways, and
Right.
so it's hard to say where, but I would say this would be probably pretty good timing.
I might have to do
Park
that.
at the furnace, park at the Hope Furnace that you
Oh, yeah,
come to.
a lot of historical.
Just before you get to the Lake Hope State Park, and then just take the hiking trail along the edge of the lake.
And it's really
It's a
just
beautiful
set- it's
trail.
Right.
and the lake is just, once again, it's beautiful just because it's one of the more steep basin and scenic, lakes
Absolutely.
in Ohio. So I definitely recommend that as a prime place to go.
All right, Randall, this is Ian. This is Ian's photo. This is Cedar Falls, correct?
Yep, this is Cedar Falls in Adams County. It's way off the beaten track. In order to get to it, you have to park at a little tiny place called Cedar Mills, and you sort of hike in. The first time I went to this place, I was standing right on the edge of on the lip of the falls, having photographed it, and this was in spring, in I think late April. And I looked up, and there was a gentleman coming towards me. He had what looked like a beagle with him, and he was dressed in camo gear, and he looked kind of like Sylvester Stallone in Rambo. He was carrying a crossbow,
Right.
and he had a very determined look on his face, and he was coming straight towards me. And I was completely unarmed with this thousands of bucks worth of camera gear, and I'm thinking, he's a lot bigger than I am. And when he got close enough, he said, "Y'all seen any wild turkey around here, boy?" It was turkey hunting season.
Right.
And I said, no, I've just been photographing the waterfall. And he clambered down the side of the falls, leaving his dog standing on the brink,
Right.
not quite knowing what to do. And he wandered off down the stream. But it's a remote stream. It's owned by the Nature Conservancy, the Ohio chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And it's a beautiful valley with arborvitae and lots of rare plants and wildflowers and things like that. This is actually a little piece of the top section of the falls because the main section of the falls literally fell over.
Oh, wow.
Maybe 20 years ago, and the main part collapsed. So this is the only part really that's left of what used to be a much taller waterfall.
Now, I have a question about the way the water looks in this, with the silky smooth motion. Briefly, how do you achieve that look? It's a classic landscape photography look, but how do you
Well,
do
it's a
that?
wide-angle lens, which landscape photographers, we tend to use wide-angle lenses a lot to get a lot of sense of depth of field. And the camera is on a tripod. The reason it's on a tripod is that I like, people say, what is the best shutter speed on your camera when you're photographing waterfalls? And my smart-ass response is, what do you want the water to look like?
Right.
If you want it to look frozen in space, 60th of a second, even a 1/25th of a second. If you want it to look some movement but more sort of sensuous, anything from about a quarter of a second up to 5, 10, or even 20 seconds sometimes, depending on the size of the falls and how much water there is in it. This was probably about a 1/2 or 1 second time exposure, and you cannot hold a camera or an iPhone still for 1/2 or 1 second. You may think you can,
Right.
but you can't.
Right.
You're going to get blur, so you have to immobilize the camera, which with a regular camera means putting it on a tripod and using a cable release.
Perfect. And then, Randall, this is another image of a waterfall with a little bit of the same shutter speed, but how did you get this little kid to stay still?
Well, yeah. Well, once again, this is where serendipity kind of comes in. You know, once again, that's I'm
This
sure a lot
is
of
Ash Cave.
Ash Cave.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is one that is definitely one that you have to be there at a particular time, obviously in the spring, because it's the only time it actually in the summer you don't have enough rain and it might be trickling down there, but that's about it. You might have a little trickle coming down there. So usually in the spring you definitely have to go out there in the spring, so I had actually, they were not there initially. I was there photographing. There were a few people around me, and I had not noticed them being back off to the side. So I was obviously taking a bunch of pictures. It was a beautiful scene without the people. But then just all of a sudden, and I don't think they saw me initially anyways. They just kind of walked out there, and it was almost as if it was a production or something where I had told them, okay.
Because I wondered that. Did you tell him to stand still?
No,
Yeah.
it just happened. It just happened. Sometimes, I have done that,
Sure.
or I'm with friends and something and set the picture up. But this was, I couldn't do any better setting this up,
Right.
where it just happened naturally, and she just walked into the scene, and the child just was looking towards the fall, and boom. I mean, I took several shots, and that was it. So it really, adds a lot, the human and the personal
Absolutely.
part.
And they're a long way away, so you don't even need a model release, which
Exactly.
helps.
and there's,
Right.
yes,
And you're on public
exactly.
land. Exactly.
Right. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Did you get a model release for the sheep? Did it sign
No.
off? Okay.
We did get one for Rick Moore. Yes,
Okay,
for
good.
that photograph. I
Yeah.
did send him one, and he signed it. Yeah.
So the Crystal King in Ohio Caverns.
Crystal King is in Ohio Caverns. We have a number of caverns that you can visit around the state. If you like stalactites and stalagmites, I'd recommend Ohio Caverns, which is about an hour's drive west of Columbus, right on the edge of Logan and Champaign counties. And I think it was discovered turn of the century by a farmhand.
Wow.
And it's a fantastic place. You can take sort of a 45-minute tour. They allowed me in with my camera and a tripod because I needed a tripod because of the long exposures.
Right.
And again, I just used the lights that they had
So
set
they have
up.
lights set up there.
They have
Right.
lights set up there. But this is certainly the most dramatic stalactite The stalactites with the C, the ones that hang down from the ceiling, and the stalagmites, I think, with a G, are the ones that grow up from the ground. That's the way
That's
I try
it.
to
No,
remember.
and I always remember tight,
Tight.
means they have
You're
to be
hanging on
tight.
tight.
That's always the way I
That's
remember
right.
that.
Yep, fourth grade science class.
I,
Yeah,
see
yeah.
that- I recall reading on their website, this thing is about 5 feet long, weighs 400 pounds, and according to their website, has taken 200,000 years to grow.
That's incredible. Absolutely
Yeah.
incredible. All right. Conkle's Hollow. This is gorgeous.
Thank you.
First thought, we mentioned how it's a physical job. What was the hike in like to get this shot? It's cold.
Well, that's
you
a pretty
know?
good hike, is Ian,
Yeah.
and many for the.
He's a
it's-
runner. I'm not.
Oh, yeah. Right.
But so yeah, it's at least a 20-minute if you're really
20 to 30
really
minute.
Yeah, 20 minutes if you're
Right.
really hauling.
In snow and looks very cold.
Yeah, right. So the interesting thing about this photograph, it was actually secondary. There's another photograph in the book, at the end of the book, that's of Goodale Park, of a gazebo with same beautiful snow. So what happened initially, and this is something that a lot of times, you know, and everybody knows, you get that beautiful snowfall, it doesn't hang around very long.
Right.
Usually it's maybe an hour or two, if that. So initially I started in Columbus. It was beautiful, wet snow, clinging. I mean, it's just fairyland, you know, just beautiful. So I started out in Columbus and got some great stuff, Goodale Park, the gazebo there, and 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours gone by, and it was like noon, and I thought, wow, it's still beautiful. It's still around. No wind, you know, knocking off the snow off the limbs yet, and not warming up so that it starts to melt. It actually literally hung around for probably at least 7 or 8 hours.
Wow.
So noon, I'm thinking, okay, I've shot what I want in Columbus. Where it might be at, and I'm thinking Conkle's Hollow, because I was also seeing for the Columbus shots, I didn't want a lot of any kind of sunlight. You know, obviously the sunlight's going to break it up, and that's going to be it. But I saw that it looked like it was going to start to open up, and of course, from experience, knowing Conkle's Hollow, knowing the light and stuff, I thought, yeah, if that starts to break in the afternoon, you know, I could get lucky, and even so, it's probably going to be pretty nice. So the other thing that's interesting about it is the oak trees. You know, it was this was actually November 11th.
So it's
I
an
think.
early snow, yeah.
Yeah, it's an early snow, very early snow. So you still had the color of the
Right.
oak trees, which, you know, usually that would be gone.
Right.
So that's one thing that adds to it. But so I left at 12. I got down there about 1:30. You know, hiked up half hour, 20 minutes, half hour. Probably it was 20 minutes because in this case I wanted to get up there
right.
in a hurry. And by God, I got up there, and it was, you know, still the snow was clinging to the trees, and of course I had that added color of the oak trees,
Right.
and then I saw that the sun was just starting to break, and it hadn't gone down. It was just about in the right position. So there was some planning here, obviously, but luck that it turned out that way. But yeah, I mean, it's you won't see Conkle's Hollow like that too often.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, so it's one of those. Like I said, you just never know what nature's gonna throw out.
And in the book, for those of you who haven't seen it, this it's a double-page spread.
Yes,
it's
it's
gorgeous.
panoramic.
And the layout of the book is phenomenal because the photographs like this, you have so much detail and able to see them. It's beautiful in that spread.
Thank you.
Last picture, then we'll have a couple questions real quick. This is Phrase Hardware, correct? Where was this? How did you find this? And can we go hang out there? 'Cause that
Well,
looks-
one of my friends is a gentleman who's the president of the Ohio Lincoln Highway Association.
Okay.
Lincoln Highway basically went from New York all the way through to, I think, San Francisco, cross country, and it came through Ohio from East Liverpool through to Van Wert. And he wanted to do a magazine article on old hardware stores along the Lincoln Highway.
Wow.
And he had
It's
found
very specific.
He had found 5 of them that were over a century old.
Wow.
And I agreed to tag along with him and do some photography. We still haven't done the article in the sense that it hasn't been published, but we'll get it done eventually. This was the 5th one. This was Frey Hardware, which is in a tiny little town called Kirby, which is just west of Upper Sandusky
Okay.
in Wyandotte County. And it's a completely undistinguished looking tin shack from the outside. I mean, you just drive past it, you wouldn't think of going, but you go inside And that's what it looks like, where you would actually pay for your hardware. And I just couldn't get enough of it. I
No.
mean, you've got all of these trophies and everything there, and I
Everything
took
you could ever
photographs, everything you could think of. The
Looks like
owners
you
were
spent
there.
a couple hours in
Oh,
there with
easily.
all these-
Yeah,
all this little
we did.
knickknacks.
I got some shots of the owners as well.
Right.
But that was one which I just, wow.
And I love this because it's an interior as well, but it
Yeah.
still is Ohio.
It
And you can
is
still
very
kind
much
of tell
Ohio.
what culture you're in,
Yeah.
who these people are that might be in. You can imagine who's in there. So it's not a landscape per se, but it speaks of Ohio
Yeah.
and us. So yeah, that's one of my favorite. Everything you could possibly need. Phrase on there.
Many places like that around
Right.
Ohio. The challenge is to find
Find
them.
them.
You know.
Yeah, to get off the interstate.
Exactly.
Yeah, get off the interstate,
Get off
for
the
sure.
interstate, hit the corners. So,
Right.
perfect. That's all the photographs we've had selected. Love to open it up for a couple questions. We have a little bit of time left. Does anyone have any questions for Ian or Randall? Yes. We can scoot back in here too, real quick.
That's interesting that you
That's for
mentioned
this
that.
guy.
I was just out last night and did a really nice shot of Columbus. So I'm trying to get into the field. It's the thing with that is obviously you have regulations and you have to get licensed. But the technology has just within 1 or 2 years has exploded. And I'm not a real tech whiz, so. But they've gotten to the point where a 10-year-old could actually fly the things.
Yeah.
And so they're amazing, and it's I do have a lot of clients, landscape architects and so forth, where I always a lot of times need a little elevation to get the patterns and the of the landscape. It helps with having a little bit of elevation. So I have numerous clients that it would be very useful. So I'm trying to get into it with everything else that I've got going. I'm working on another Columbus book, and then I'm also working with Ohio History Connection, their timeline series. We're hoping to do a kind of a then and now of starting off with Columbus and then a couple other cities. So a lot on the plate, but definitely the drone photography is just something I really do want to.
And the technology is coming so fast. And it's
It's
so
just,
cheap.
yeah,
to
exactly.
Get in. It
Right,
really
yeah.
is.
So, yeah, it's definitely something I'm got my feet in now, and would definitely. There's so many. I'd like to do a book of just
Ohio from the air.
Ohio from the air
you
by
go.
drone.
Put it on the list.
Yeah, it's on my list for sure.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you keep yourselves organized? When you take so many pictures, how do you keep organized?
Well, each photographer does it in a different way. In my previous life, I was a consultant in a big 8 accounting firm, and I have an MBA background, so I'm used to being somewhat organized. What I do is when I've taken all my pictures for that particular shoot, whether it's on my iPhone, which is my favorite camera, by the way, not the best one I've got a bunch of Nikons that are much more capable, but my favorite camera is my iPhone. And when I come back at the end of a shoot, I take all of the pictures, and the first thing I do is I dump them into an Adobe program called Lightroom. Lightroom is sort of a sister program to Photoshop. It's a lot easier to learn, and it allows you to store all of your pictures as a database, so that, unlike Photoshop, where you can only look at one picture at a time, with Lightroom, I have access. In my case, I have about 45,000 digital pictures. And they're all in hundreds of different folders scattered over various hard drives. But when I'm in Lightroom, I can look at them all at once. I can ask questions like Google, how many barn pictures have I got from Harrison County? And they'll instantly pop up on the screen because I keyword them. So I go through and I look at them. I throw away the ones that aren't sharp, the ones where the lighting is terrible. So now I've got a bunch that I actually process, fine-tune the color, fine-tune the lighting. And then I type in the various keywords and things so that I've got that information. And then it basically sort of sits there as part of the database. And I can draw from that and create what I call collections, which would be for a particular book project. So this was the Ohio Book Project, and it became a collection. And I drew pictures from various folders all over my various hard drives and then built up those. So you have to be organized. Yeah, I mean, if you don't do that, If you've only got 100 photographs, it's easy to find the one you want. But when you've got 45,000, you'd better have them organized, or you're not going to be able to function. It's something you just have to do.
We have time for one more question, then we'll wrap up, and then they'll be sticking around for a little bit afterwards as well. So any other questions we have? Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for being here. About a hand for Ian and Randall. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
Absolutely. Again, the book, Ohio in Photographs, A Portrait of the Buckeye State, maybe the Bobcat State. I guess we'll go with Buckeye State. But absolutely wonderful book. Be sure to take a look at it. It's fantastic. So thank you both for coming and joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. I
Thank you.
enjoyed it.